The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents a debate review with Eric Murphy on the debate, Do We Need God to Make Sense of Life? So hey, welcome. How's everybody doing? We just did one of these like last month because
yes,
you're going gangbusters
dude,
on debates.
Everywhere that I can. It's exciting. This one I was nervous about, but I saw the debate topic, and I know we're going to go over that.
Yep.
But it was an opportunity. I couldn't pass it up. So,
well, it's a great opportunity here. By the way, I'm going to tell you guys what we're going to do. We're actually going to record two different discussions. One, I'm going to ask him questions, get his thoughts about the debate. We'll have a bit of a discussion. That's this one that you're going to be watching here. Then we're going to do a second one where he asked me questions after having watched the debate. We're not quite sure where the conversation will go, but that's going to be posted on Eric's channel, so we'll get those cross-posted.
Brand new channel. If you like this or you're supportive of seeing me do debates and that kind of content, definitely follow the link over there because I'm really wanting to build it up and grow it, and I'm really, really appreciative that you're helping out here, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then I'm going to sit down and record a third video that's not specifically about this debate, but focuses on the issues surrounding how to choose a topic for debate and how to make sure that you are tailoring your message so that it fits the topic. And also, when you shouldn't give a rat's ass what the topic is in the first place, or the fact that it might be worded. I have some friends who are really picky about what the topic of the debate is. I'm not as picky. I think you can set up whatever subject your question, but as long as you're focused on that. And I kind of wanted to start there, even though we're going to do that as the third video just for me.
Yeah.
It was, do we need God to make sense of life? Now, this was a team debate.
Yes.
So you had a partner. And
I met my partner about 3 minutes before we started.
Oh, well, that's always good.
Yeah.
But when you mentioned a minute ago, when you heard the title of this debate, you knew what you were going to do. What was your take on the subject? Do we need God to make sense of life?
Saitem Bruggen Kate. My immediate thought was presuppositional apologetics. This is clearly going to go down this route. And it was interesting because I reached out to the person putting it on. His name's Pedro. He's a really nice guy. And the entire reason he wanted to do this, the way he described it to me, was he wanted to create an environment that fosters positive discussions. And I called him up and I was like, this is the topic that you want to have? Do you understand that this essentially is an argument that is incredibly frustrating and also doesn't open itself up to discussion at all?
Now, you anticipated that they were going to go down a more presuppositional route. Mm-hmm. They certainly touched on that at points, but I don't think that's... What did they spend their time on?
Pedro really, to his credit, kept the discussion away from falling down that line. He took the time, and I know he was involved more than other moderators. I felt like he was in it way more than he was during it, but...
Well, let's hit that point.
Yeah.
Because this is... So when Eric got back from the debate, one of the first things he said was, oh my gosh, this moderator was like all up in our business, chiming in left and right and everything else. And then I watched the debate, which by the way, I've already posted on the Atheist Debates channel, and it's live to everybody. I watched the debate, and I don't think that he was in it quite as much as you initially thought.
No, I felt really bad about that actually, because...
But there's a weird thing to this, because this wasn't just a debate. This was something that was being done for his podcast, which I think gave him the motivation to feel like he needed to interject and be involved perhaps more than a moderator should.
Yeah, I did not realize that it had that bent, but I was still grateful for the opportunity. So, yeah.
The danger there, though, like I've moderated debates before, and from my view, the moderator's job is to stay the hell out of the way, make sure we don't go down rabbit trails. In some cases, the moderator might have the job of sorting through audience questions and then picking out the ones that you're going to ask. But the individuals who are doing the debate need to have 90% of the time. As a moderator, my job is to say, here's the rules, I'm here to enforce them. You get 10 minutes, you get 10 minutes. And I'm going to cut you off. And, and if you're asking a question, it ends in a question mark and doesn't begin with your life story and a dissertation, that kind of thing, to make sure that everybody knows what page we're on. there are different moderator styles, and in some occasions, I've been okay with it saying, okay, instead of taking questions from the audience, I'm going to be the one that's directing questions, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that you get equal time. Mm-hmm. The one thing I will say is that he interjected not just with the steering and asking the questions, but provided his own thoughts and moved things sometimes in a different direction.
Absolutely. And it kind of got frustrating because I wanted to be able to respond to something that our debate opponents had said. And when it came through, Pedro said, okay, so what do you think of this related topic, but not exactly on topic? And so I think that might have contributed to the frustration.
Sure. But in hindsight, when you watched it again, even you acknowledge, he didn't jump in quite as much as it felt like he jumped in.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing for me is you had an impression after leaving it that was false. Also you had a false memory at one point.
A total false memory. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, there was a part where they were falling into this no true Scotsman fallacy, and they're saying, oh, Christians don't do this and Christians don't. And I popped in and said, but are they Scotsmen? And the person on the other side went, oh, no true Scotsman. And I had this memory in my head of him describing what that meant. But after watching it, that never happened. Yeah. And so, we were watching it together, and I was like, oh, hey, this is going to happen. And it didn't happen.
This tells us a lot about how we think.
Yeah.
Because if I know somebody understands me, there's like a separate conversation that never happens anyplace other than my head, but it lives there as a potential memory. If I use a shorthand language with somebody and, I just say, no true Scotsman, and they're like, oh, no true Scotsman. I understand that they understand it. Mm-hmm. And so in my head, it's entirely possible to construct a false memory that there was a conversation that took place where there was an explanation and acknowledgement. And it's because we tend to give people the benefit of the doubt and we, ride by inference. But we were, before we talked about your false memory, we talked about the fact that the moderator was steering things in a certain direction, but you left with an impression that he was constantly involved. And then when you watched it back, you're like, oh, he wasn't as involved. And I think one of the key things is that a moderator, it's not so much how much they're involved, but it's in what way they're involved. And so when you're in a debate, I watched, and you had a place you were going. You had a thought in your head, and the moderator kind of stomped on it a little and shifted in a different direction. Mm-hmm. The danger is that can give audience members the impression that the moderator is favoring one side or the other, that, oh, the atheists are about to set a trap, or, oh, the Christians are about to set a trap, and so I want to make sure I steer away from that trap. So, and it could be because they're trying to avoid being too contentious. It could be because they're doing their podcast and have something to say. But it's fascinating to me that your impression of it fundamentally changed after watching it back.
This is another example of being in the heat of the moment. There are so many parts to it that we just don't recognize when we're armchair quarterbacking after the fact. Yeah. You watch it, and even when you're having these discussions online, you're looking into a camera. It's absolutely different. This is different than doing something in front of an audience on a stage. And the way you approach people, the way you think about things, just fundamentally is different. And I was ready for it more this time than the first time. When I went up against David Wood, I was just this nervous mess, and I was much more comfortable this time. But I wasn't as clear as I usually am on the shows. And so I definitely saw that there's a long way to go, and it's a skill that just needs that practice to get there.
Yeah.
So
there's always already a 90 day. If you watch the last debate that we posted with Eric and this one, you'll see that he's much more relaxed, and that's great. I want your impressions of, first of all, doing a team debate. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on it now that you've actually done one?
I'm so selfish. I want to be able to go in and dig and guide the discussion. I think that my teammate was fantastic. I think that he knows his stuff, and he was ready to talk about it. And you can tell he had all of these notes. And when I talked to him a few minutes before, he's like, I'm ready. And he's showing me all these pages. And I'm happy that he was there and doing that. On the other side of it, though, you can tell that he had these points kind of manufactured, and so when the topic went there, he kind of flew over people's heads a bit, and he started talking about these topics that were just, they needed context, and instead he wanted to give it.
It's two different styles.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I think one of the issues is this whole thing of meeting the person who's on your team just a few minutes beforehand. If I agreed to, I've done team debates a couple of times. Mm-hmm. I generally don't like them, even though the people that I worked with were phenomenal. JT and I did team debates. Chris DiCarlo and I did a team debate, and they were all great. It's good when the two of you are perhaps addressing different issues or have different specialties, so that you know when to hand off to each other. If you're too similar, then it becomes, wait, I wanted to say that. Oh, wait, no, that's not the way I would say it. I would say it this other way. And you get into kind of that mindset. It was fun to watch, your partner there comes in with kind of a prepared statement and a direction to go. And you, in your opening statement, took it a little more freeform and were kind of already starting to respond a little to what you anticipated and what they were actually saying.
It was way more comfortable that way. I was the only one on that stage who did not have a notepad with a prepared statement. And they said, who wants to go first? And Joel, my teammate, said, I want to go first. And I looked and I said, well, I want to go last. And it's funny because you see how that changes. And when I look at my first debate, I wanted to set the tone of it and the pacing and say, okay, well, if we're going to look for this result, is it rational? Then we should be looking for these kinds of things. But during this debate, I took your advice. I sat back and I listened, and instead of coming out with a prepared statement, I met them where they were. And I think that furthered the conversation in a way that was more palatable to the audience. And I think it was just way more effective. And I kind of always want to do that.
So one of the things I noticed right off the bat, well, I won't say right off the bat because I listened to all 4 opening statements. I'm not convinced there's a single person on that stage who actually addressed the written topic of the debate. It was, the topic was, do we need God to make sense of life?
I think Joel touched on it.
Yeah.
And
everybody kind of poked around it.
Yeah, well, and it was interesting because there were times where our opponents were kind of baiting, the discussion itself, the presuppositional apologetic, is that you need to be able to base your understanding of the world in a transcendent, being to be able to rationalize.
God is the only thing that can ground rationality.
Exactly. And so we started talking about what makes something better. And they said, well, better by what standard? Better by... And I just wanted to reach across and say, just tell them, why are you burying the lead? Just tell them your point, because we never got there. And so I think it was frustrating for both of us, because I think they wanted to be able to do their aha, gotcha moment, and we wanted to be able to respond to it, but we never actually did.
Although one of the points that kept coming up, they didn't really do a proper presuppositionalist defense. They talked a little bit about logical foundations, but they hit on a number of different things. And it was funny. The first debate that you did with David, his entire opening argument wasn't an argument; it was his personal testimony.
Yeah. And
in this debate, at least one of the two spent a good deal of time on their personal testimony, with the notion that they used to be an atheist. And
a terrible human. I don't know why, but this is the second time now that I've gone up against a Christian, and this is 2 out of 2, where their statement was, I didn't believe, and I was this horrible human being. And so he's talking about, oh, well, I would lie to anybody that, and I didn't even need to lie, but I just did because my conscience was seared. And I think that is actually a pretty big tell, And the tell there is he doesn't have a lot of experience speaking outside of his congregation. When he says, my conscience was seared, you know, and I know that that's church lingo.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot that's built in there. And
My
if you
soul was convicted. I was corrupt. I was given over to a reprobate mind.
Yes.
It's this notion that and this is what frustrated me, because the subject, which we'll deal with in another video, was, do you need God to make sense of life? And his view was, you need to have a God belief in order to not be a terrible human being. So it was far closer to a moral argument that without God, everything is hedonism. That has nothing to do with whether or not you can make sense of life rationally. That's all about morality.
Absolutely.
And evidently he was just horrible. And then his belief in God made him better. And if we were having that debate, the phrasing of that might be, do we need God to be moral? And his opening statement wouldn't really have done that topic any more service than it did this one, because the truth is, it's not so much that he needed God to be moral. He needed to believe that there was a God who was going to judge him and serve as a grounding to be moral.
Right.
Which are two different things.
Oh, yeah.
You know, hey, do I need a lucky rabbit's foot to be moral? Well, I may not need one, but if I believe the lucky rabbit's foot is going to make me moral or make me lucky or whatever else it is, that's completely different from whether or not there's a God that serves as a necessary foundation.
Yeah, is it actually lucky? Well, we can test that. But yeah, and that wasn't the only thing that he did. There was this straw atheist that kept getting painted that blew my mind. It was, according to the atheist philosopher Jeffrey Dahmer. And I'm sitting there like, I'm not pointing out evil Christians to try and attack during my discussion with them. But Nazis, literal Nazis, like they didn't even like allude to Nazis. They went
it was Hitler.
Straight up Godwin, like right away. And Jeffrey Dahmer. And I see no way that creates a compassionate, open dialogue. They were speaking to the congregation. They weren't speaking to me, and they weren't trying to convince anybody. They weren't trying to change anybody's minds. And that was painfully obvious through the entire thing, to me at least.
Yeah, it's funny when people bring up somebody like Dahmer or Hitler. I mean, Hitler was a Catholic.
Great atheist philosophers, by the way.
Yeah. Not an atheist, not a philosopher. Dahmer, not a philosopher, and found Jesus in prison after all the horrific things he did. And to me, that's an indictment of the whole salvation process within Christianity, that you could be such a terrible person that you could kill people and eat people and all this other stuff. Yeah. And then once you're locked up and no longer a direct threat to society, well, you find Jesus and he's ready to sweep you up to heaven with forgiveness. Now, it's, from a Christian standpoint, I understand it's nice to think, wow, no matter what bad thing I've done, I can always truly repent and God will forgive me.
Yeah, you can experience that absolution.
But if you're talking about justice, then you have somebody like, one of Schilling's favorite examples was Anne Frank. So she's Jewish. Mm-hmm. We're all familiar with her story. I don't think any of us would put her in the same category with Hitler or Dahmer. But according to Christianity, she'd be burning in hell because she was Jewish and not Christian. And yet Jeffrey Dahmer is supposedly in heaven under that very model.
Yeah.
So when people bring this up, I wonder how much time they've actually spent thinking about it. But in this case, he was already, well, I used to be an atheist. Okay. The one question that I was kind of hoping somebody would hit on that they didn't was, what do you mean by that? Did you just mean once upon a time you didn't believe? Because that's true for everybody. When I was a baby, I didn't believe. Right. At some point, I became convinced of the truth. And what matters more to me is, why did you become convinced?
Honestly, he waffled back and forth between having always believed and known about God and then saying, clearly, I had no idea who God and Jesus was. One of those statements is a lie. They cannot both be true at the same time.
It was very strange to hear him say, hey, I was an atheist. but I'd been running from God or hiding from God. I forget how he phrased it, but it was very much it's his current view that he wasn't so much a non-believer for rational reasons so much as he was a denier. And that's the thing you'll find when Christians in particular talk about how they used to be an atheist. Well, they were a non-believer and now they believe. And so now when they look back on the person they were when they used to not believe, that person can't be a rational actor. There can't be good reasons for it. Otherwise, their current position is the one that's flawed. And so everything about their view of who they were as an atheist, it's like they've never met or talked to any of us who have rational reasons for not believing.
Yeah. And really that's kind of the tragedy of where we are in society right now is we put ourselves in these bubbles and we're absolutely not exposed to what the rest is. And yeah, I absolutely see that kind of going back because you know as well as I do that in this presuppositional apologetic viewpoint, everyone knows that God exists and everyone knows that God is there.
Right.
We just choose to deny that God. And that, I think that kind of played into why he was saying it the way he was saying it, because looking back, well, I always knew, even if he had never known about God all the way up until later, and that was the truth of it, relaying it back for that to be, coherent with his worldview, he had to have said, oh no, I did know about God, I was just choosing to deny the existence of that God.
Yeah, it's a frustrating line. Was there well, you looking back on it now, you lived the debate, you watched it again, you've kind of reviewed things. In addition to the fact that they were kind of repeatedly presenting a straw-man version of atheism. You can't be moral without God. But it seemed to all be assertions and the fallacious appeal to consequences. Like, if there is no God, then there's not going to be justice or a foundation for reason. And I don't want to live in a world where there's not a foundation for reason or where there's not justice. And therefore, it's necessary for a God to exist or for us to believe in a God. When you were kind of going through this, sitting up there, what things stood out to you from the other side? I mean, where was it clear that they were sincerely representing their views, and where maybe did it go sideways?
That's a really good question. Where were they representing their views? I think...
Or what I mean by that is like
yeah.
presenting an argument to defend the view rather than just stating what their position was.
I think that when they were creating that straw atheist position, they really were in this mindset that this is what it is, and so they needed to set it up to be able to address it. And so I think that their attempt to do so was not disingenuous, it was just not good. You know what I mean?
It's like, well, they were used to talking to their congregations.
Right, and so atheists think this, and so if I take this atheist that I have in my mind, then all I have to do is X, Y, and Z, and they're now a Christian. And so when he came up on stage, you can see that practice. Well, this is the atheist, and so you X, Y, and Z, and we're right there on the stage.
Yeah.
And yeah.
There's a moment where you said something like that.
Twice.
Yeah.
Twice at the very beginning when they did their opening statements, I said, if you want to talk to an atheist, right here. But don't put words in our mouths and go straight for Nazis and serial killers and suicide bombers.
There's a very authoritarian view that comes with a religious mindset because you have your holy book or what you've received directly through divine revelation or whatever, and it's all a top-down instructive authoritative view. And once you've accepted that and adopted it as this is the right way to go about things, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to fairly represent a worldview that doesn't have that sort of thing. So when their thing is, well, there has to be some instruction, there has to be some lawgiver, there has to be this thing, and it needs to all be top down. And when they would present their positions against, the atheists, one of the things they do most often, and I think both of the guys that you were debating did this, is they'll read a quote from some famous atheist.
Yeah, they both did that
as if
multiple times.
that represents you. But it doesn't. And this comes from a presumption that, well, if everybody who's a Christian has this book as their authority, then everybody who's an atheist must have some shared view and some top-down thing. So because Richard Dawkins said thus and so, or because this, oh my gosh, did they also bring up the Anthony Flew?
Yes, they did. I remember because you were really pissed off about that when we were.
Oh, it's the most frustrating ever, because first of all, neither of our opinion. If you pulled me up in one of Eric's debates and say, well, Matt Dillahunty said, then the first thing out of Eric's mouth should be, I'm not Matt Dillahunty. I don't know why you couldn't just have the conversation with me, ask me what I thought, because I'm not beholden to what these other people think. But in the case of Anthony Flew, you have somebody who is a legitimate atheist philosopher, British and popular, in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And then around the 90s or early 2000s, he was older. And he became a target of opportunity for some intelligent design proponents who managed to convince him that through some bad arguments that he would have refuted handily years before, that there must be some sort of God. He didn't necessarily believe in a personal God, and certainly not the Christian God. Right. And they messed up in that debate but they corrected themselves.
Yeah, they said I could be wrong about that.
There's a point where they were like Anthony Flew, who ended up a Christian, and then I think a few moments later, before Joel could correct them, or maybe Joel was talk about false memories. At some point, they realized, oh, well, maybe he was more deist and not Christian, which is true. But the truth is, if Anthony Flew became a Christian, the only thing that matters is the argument and evidence that convinced him, not the fact that it was Anthony Flew. But if the best you can do is pull up someone who, in their waning years before death, probably not, and in Anthony's case, almost certainly not, possessing the cognitive faculties they had years before, that they became convinced of something, tells you nothing.
No.
About whether or not they should have become convinced,
and whether or not ultimately it's true.
Yeah, I mean, if Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or whoever winds up a God believer and says something, presents their case for it, then the case is judged on its own merits, not because Dawkins or Harris or Hitchens or whoever said it.
Yeah.
But if you're in that mindset of, oh, it's an authoritarian, top-down, delivered from on high message, it's very difficult to look at atheists and say, oh, well, this atheist said this, and that means you all have to believe it.
Yeah.
Which is absolute garbage.
But
I argue with atheists more than I do with theists.
Yeah, I disagreed with Joel during the debate.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was, I'm sorry, that just reminds me of a conversation that I had with my pastor the first time I told him I was an atheist, which was the last time he ever spoke to me, by the way. I told him I was an atheist, and he said, but how could you be? Because Stephen Hawking recently made a mistake, and now he's the laughingstock of the scientific world, and everybody's laughing at him, so how could it possibly be that atheism is true? See, Stephen Hawking was wrong. And I just could not wrap my head around how that made sense. But yeah, in that context, you see somebody who appears to be an authority that has this viewpoint that's different from yours, and so by taking down that authority, they're thinking that they're taking down the legitimacy of the claim.
So back to this debate.
Yeah.
A couple quick notes. What did you think? Now, obviously, there were improvements and changes, and you were doing this a little more on the fly. You definitely felt more comfortable. But what do you think you might have missed through this? Or like when you left the debate, were you wishing you had said?
There's so many things. Oh my goodness, I can take it apart piece by piece. The first is I got caught up on better. When we were talking about what is better and what is that, what I needed to do is cut the shit and say, what are you trying to say? Let's get to the point here. And I didn't do that. Instead, I got caught up in this little word game that lasted way too long. And another thing is, I would have brought a better microphone. The audio quality was horrendous.
Yeah.
Horrendous. And listening back, I know that you did your best to clean it up. It was way worse, by the way. And for those of you watching, it was way, way worse. Matt really did go in and clean it up the best he could. And
I'm not an audio engineer, but it's at least listenable.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on the substance, it was funny to me that this whole issue of better. I know why they went down that road, because how do you say A is better than B? What is the measuring stick by which you determine what is better? That would have actually been a good discussion, because I suspect that the measuring stick they would have would be God.
Yep.
Except the truth is, the measuring stick they have is whatever their personal subjective view of God is, independent of whether or not there is a God. And it's the reason why theists of all stripes can disagree on what's better or what's more moral and what's not. And if the atheist acknowledges that, the Christian gets to say, well, we have an objective standard and you just have your subjective thing. It's just a matter of opinion. But for me, the best solution to that is to say, okay, let's pick a couple of examples. Because if you and I agree that winning the lottery is better than being diagnosed with cancer, we've gone to those two extremes. Then whatever our standards are, even if they're different, we can at least agree on what is better, even if we're not completely on the same page about why it's better. And so if the argument is that we're going to be moving towards a better world, we may disagree. You might think that the world is better with this rule in place or this social norm in place, because that's what your God wants. And I might think it's better because this actually benefits society, and the alternative would be objectively worse, that there would be increasing suffering.
Right.
You can have whatever criteria you want.
Well, so during the debate, I wanted to kind of make that point. I don't think I did a very good job of it. So I'd redo that too. I said, were we more moral 200 years ago, or something to that effect? And why is that different? Oh, well, they weren't reading the Bible right. And it's just, it blows my mind how they can absolutely toss aside the fact that there were slave Bibles that had all reference of being freed, taken out of them, and that people pointed to the Bible to justify how they kept their slaves and all of that. And yet, they would say that we were not getting better, that the only justification for having something better is the very book that was used to keep us back in the past. I know that there are many better ways to say that, and I think I need to practice that and have that ready in an elevator pitch to be able to give next time.
The topic itself, do we need a God to make sense of life? I think is a potentially interesting topic, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
We're going to stick a pin in it here, and Eric's going to ask me some questions in a video that we talked about earlier that'll be posted over at his channel. And there's a lot more coming up, including the video about the actual subject of the debates, which ones you might want to avoid, why you sometimes don't care, and what my thoughts are on how I take a debate topic and analyze it and break it down. We'll get all that and more next time. Thanks. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.